What's up everyone, Darkblade here bringing you a Transformers Fall of Cybertron video about the recent multiplayer update that has happened on the 29th of August. High Moon Studios have brought out this update to try to balance out the classes a little bit more in the multiplayer. They have been watching and monitoring how well these classes compare to each other, and this update confronts some of the issues that they've seen thanks to their monitoring and thanks to player feedback. High Moon Studios are pleased that they're off to a fantastic start, with each class performing quite well. Things do seem balanced overall, but there are a few issues that this update will address and hopefully make every option, every upgrade, every ability equally viable. Anyway, let's get into the meat of the episode and talk about the changes that have come with this update. Firstly, let's talk about the changes that came for the Infiltrator class. The first change to the Infiltrator class is with its Scatter Blaster weapon. The Scatter Blaster damage has now been increased to do 15 damage per pellet, up from 12. Now in the demo, the Scatter Blaster was a very hard hitting weapon, and High Moon Studios edited it to try to address this. But unfortunately, they feel that they overshot the mark too much and made it too weak. Hopefully this change will make the Scatter Blaster more viable for the Infiltrator class. I personally think this is a great change as it makes the weapon more viable. With the Infiltrator, I normally found myself switching to the Path Blaster or the Subsonic Repeater. The second change to the Infiltrator class is another Scatter Blaster change, but to one of its modifications. The Fire Blast upgrade now does more burn damage. It's been increased from 15 damage per second to 20. Basically, High Moon Studios thought that the damage reduction in the pellet damage was not being offset enough by the fire damage of this upgrade. So basically they've upped the fire damage portion of this upgrade. Personally, I think the changes to this modification are good because the Fire Blast upgrade is quite a unique upgrade. You don't get many weapons in the game that do a damage over time effect on your enemies. So I'm glad they've increased the fire damage and thus made the Fire Blast upgrade more viable. The third and final change to the Infiltrator class is with its EMP intercooler upgrade. This has made it so the EMP recharge timer is now 10 seconds instead of 7.5 seconds. High Moon Studios thought people were using the grenades too often and they wanted to change this to make it a little bit fairer. I must confess, I personally don't see a problem with this. The EMP grenade is not used that often actually when compared to Cloak. So I don't see it making a great impact. It might even put some people off from using the EMP grenade. But if you think about it, it's only a 2.5 second nerf, so it's not the longest time. And if you really wanted to, you could still pick up the intercooler pickup and still throw your grenades like crazy. So that's the changes to the Infiltrator class. Overall, they have not been bad ones. So with that, let's move on to the next class, the Scientist. The Scientist has actually received the least amount of updates. The first update, the Gear Shredder has had its homing increased. This means that the serrated blades the Gear Shredder fires should home in on people a lot better. High Moon Studios have stated that the Gear Shredder was showing up as the weakest weapon for the Scientist, and thus this is why they have made the change to increase the homing function of the Gear Shredder. This personally I think is a great change and a needed change because I really didn't like the Gear Shredder. I thought compared to the other weapons the Scientists have, it was the weakest out of them. The second change to the Scientist is with its Sentry turret. The Sentry damage has now been increased from 8 to 10 per shot. The Sentry is normally used by scientists who want to be a bit more offensive, and High Moon Studios thought they weren't quite getting this offensive boost that was needed, and thus they've upped the damage a little bit for the Sentry. I don't know how big an impact this will have on the game. It's only a small increase in damage. I just hope we don't see an influx of scientists with the Sentry instead of the healing beam. Now overall the scientists have received 2 good buffs with this update. Anyway, on to the third class, the Destroyer class. The Destroyer has received numerous nerfs and buffs. The first being, they have reduced the amount of damage that the thermal rocket cannon does from 300 to 250. This is because all you needed to use as the Destroyer was the thermal rocket cannon and you would still be killing scientists and infiltrators in about 2 hits. High Moon Studios have stated that the Destroyer was showing up as the most powerful class. Only by a small margin though. I personally think this change is quite good. The thermal rocket cannon was extremely powerful And it's not a bad change in some ways. It means it's just going to take about 3 rockets to take down someone now. Well, take down the weaker classes anyway. The second change comes in the form of the Chaos Rift Combustors damage and damage radius significantly increased. You should be doing closer to 300 damage if you hit an enemy with the first blast and the following cluster bombs that follow. High Moon Studios hope that this change will make the gun a more viable choice for the destroyer. I like this change to the weapon. I personally think the gun was good, but it wasn't quite as good as some of the other weapons in the destroyer's arsenal. The third and final change comes to the barrier. The cooldown for the barrier has now been increased from 7 seconds to 10 seconds. High Moon Studios have said that 7 seconds was too fast and that the barrier was practically always available. Now, I don't like this change, but I can understand it. I do like using the barrier a lot because the destroyer is my favourite class. Overall, the destroyer has received mostly nerfs rather than buffs. But I do understand why certain things have got nerfed. For example, the damage to the thermal rocket cannon was really high. It did make it the optimal weapon to use as the destroyer when comparing it to the other weapons that the class can use. Now, on to the fourth and final class, the Titan. The Titan has received numerous upgrades as well. The first being that the Harvester weapon has had its damage reduced. It's now gone down from 20 to 17. This is because the combination of the amount of damage it does and the amount the user is healed was too high. Basically, you would see a lot of Titans just running at you with this weapon, getting healed while doing damage to you at the same time, which was a little bit ridiculous, if a little bit fun. High Moon Studios have stated that the healing factor will remain for the gun, but the actual damage it does is just a little bit less. Overall, not a bad change, I can understand it, but the Energon Harvester was one of my favourite weapons, which has now been nerfed. The second change to the Titan class is the EDK Tech Vault has had its damage increased. It was originally 115 but has now been increased to 140. This is because this weapon really did need that extra bit of bite. It was a cool looking weapon, but compared to the other weapons in the Titan's arsenal, it wasn't the best. I personally think this is a nice little upgrade to the EDK Tech Vault, although I still fear it won't replace weapons like the Energon Harvester, but we will see. The third and final change to the Titan class is with the Flak Shield. The Flak Shield could basically absorb up to 666 damage. This has now been reduced to 500 damage. High Moon Studios have said that the Flak Shield was showing up as the clear favourite when compared to the Titan's other ability, which is Whirlwind, and this is the reason why they have reduced the amount of damage the Flak Shield can absorb. I'm a bit disappointed with this change because I did like the Flak Shield. It was my favourite ability for the Titan. The only reason I can see it being changed is when the Flak Shield is used in unison with the Energon Harvester, it's quite a deadly combination. Overall, the Titan, like the Destroyer, has received mostly nerfs rather than buffs. Now, Transformers 4 for Cybertron has not been out that long, and it's good that High Moon Studios are addressing some of these issues early on in the game's lifespan. Thus, a few months down the line, when people get into the game, maybe for Christmas or something, the game will be a lot more balanced and everyone will be playing it on an even playing field. I commend High Moon Studios for doing this, for addressing balance changes and fixing bugs, and I hope they continue to do this in future months. Anyway, I've been Darkblade, bringing you information about the multiplayer update for Transformers Fall of Cybertron for the 29th of August 2012. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.